And so based on that, and based on some of the research coming out of this report that was laid in Parliament, which suggested that we consult again, and ensure that we consult with all the requisite stakeholders, as well as move to set up a wage commission. We thought it prudent that as a government we do just that. And in fact, this government has promised that on all matters that are very important for us as a people, that we would lead through consultation. And so here this evening with us is the very well-known president of the BIU, Mr. Chris Furbett. And I think, please. And I think Mr. Furbett is known for his days at the Hamilton Dock as a longshoreman, and much of that led to his position within the union, which ultimately landed him as the president of the BIU. Mr. Furbett is respected and also well known for his keen negotiating skills, and if persons have had the ability to see him in public speak to some of the issues as it relates to the labor force, you would then appreciate why he is sitting here today, because he is data driven. He doesn't just say, he comes with his facts. And so we were very happy to have him to come and speak on the very important topic of a living wage. Also with us tonight is well-known lawyer Phil Parentchief. Phil Parentchief's background, I think, and some people don't realize this, is steeped in economics. He did political economy, he did econometrics, he did statistics, and he did public finance. And so, we've also heard him in the public domain speak on behalf of the working class and speak to social issues. And because of that background and his keen interest in the way this economy operates, he is here not as a lawyer, but more so as an economist. Then, Mr. Nathan Kowalski, who is a Chief Financial Officer and Senior Portfolio Manager at Anchor Investment Management Limited. I think that many of us have heard or seen some of his articles in the public domain as it relates to the economy. Mr. Kowalski was president of the Chartered Financial Analyst Society of Bermuda board. He was the chair of the Economic Impact Working Group for SAGE, for the SAGE Commission, and he serves on many of the boards, including the Chamber of Commerce, the Bermuda Deposit Insurance Corporation Board, and the Bermuda Public Accountability Board. And so he is the author of the column, The Financial Ramblings from the Rock, and that was featured in the Royal Gazette. And because he often lends his voice to matters of the economy, he is here tonight to speak to you on a living wage as well. I think everybody knows Mr. Cordell Riley. He is a well-known author, and he also used to be, he is the managing director of Profiles of Bermuda, a company which he founded in 1998. And he used to work, I think, in government in the Department of Statistics. Many of us understand him to be a statistician. So, and we have also heard his voice quite often in the public domain regarding how this economy operates. And so I think he took part in an open forum a year or so ago with respect to this very topic, and so he is here tonight to lend his voice. And Last but not least, the gentleman who is going to be, for the most part, hosting this, who sat as the chair of the Joint Select Committee on the minimum living wage, is Mr. no other than MP Rolf Commission, the perennial student, the advocate for all social issues, and in particular, as it relates to how it impacts on the workforce. And so I think we have made sure that we have brought before you this evening an array of speakers who come with their expertise. They will speak. They will try to focus their talks in this manner. Rolf in particular will speak somewhat on the living wage, and he will speak mainly to highlighting the difference between a minimum wage and a living wage. Mr. Farbett will speak to the benefits of a living wage. Mr. Riley will speak to how a living wages are calculated. Mr. Kowalski will look at the economic impact of introducing a living wage. And Mr. Parent-Chief will speak to the process for establishing a living wage. And do understand this, much of what they will have to say, you may find there will be overlap. But the whole point is to try and attack every angle that we think it's important as a people that you should understand and appreciate, because we're trying to elevate the awareness of it, what a living wage is and how it operates in an economy. And I just want to emphasize this. As highlighted countless times throughout the living wage report that was laid in Parliament, the suggestion was, and we accepted, that we consult with our key stakeholders, and that is you, the people of Bermuda, and every faction that makes up a society. And so this is one of 3 town hall meetings that we are having to get that talk and consultation going. We are planning legislation to strike up the Wage Commission, who will likewise make certain that they engage with key stakeholders, and I have no doubt that they will definitely continue to interact with you, the people, and meet with key stakeholders, because whatever is arrived at, it has to be something that is, I guess if you will, germane to Bermuda and best fits our economy, because the whole point is to try and make certain that we arrive at a win-win where ultimately the outcomes will be positive for all. And so I thank you all for coming, and now I am going to turn this over, and I will say that our speakers will try and keep their opening statements to about 7 minutes. And hopefully it provokes much questions from you, the public. And so we're going to turn over to Rolf, and Rolf will begin.
Thank you so much, Minister, and good evening, everyone. I guess I've been put in the position as being the moderator for the night, and so I'm just going to open up here, give some additional background on how we got to this point in terms of this public policy, which I believe is long overdue. I just think it'd be useful if I gave you the following quote. To ensure that workers can live in dignity and are not working simply to remain in poverty, the government will support a new parliamentary committee to complete the work that was started in the last parliament to examine the living wage. The committee will present Parliament with recommendations for implementing a living wage in Bermuda. Part of the rationale for myself in 2016 in pursuing the implementation of statutory wages, in this case more commonly referred to as living wages for Bermuda, was borne out by very cogent examples found in my interactions within my constituency and with Bermudians in general. So for example, I had a young lady in my constituency. She's about 25 now. This would have been about 3 years ago. She was 23 with a young child. She was the only breadwinner in her household, and they were really struggling. Her husband or boyfriend at the time, he had severe diabetes. He since which has passed away, and he was on financial assistance. I came to find out, and I had Reverend Tweed at the household one day with me, and she revealed that she'd been working as a part-time worker at a restaurant, and she's Bermudian, family goes back generations, and she was earning $7.50 an hour. As a part-time worker, she had no health insurance. She had worked over the previous 2 weeks a sum of 96 hours, and over a 6-day week with no overtime pay. She earned for that week $720. For that 96 hours, $720. That meant that after you deducted social insurance and payroll tax, she took home effectively $620.90. This woman, who I won't name, did earn gratuities, but it was a small to modest-sized restaurant, and she told me that maybe on average she would get about $100 a week, $150 a week. And so she struggled to earn roughly or under $1,000 for 2 weeks' worth of work. Another example is a restaurant. Many of us, if not all of us, looking at the composition of the audience here, has been to this restaurant over the last 25 years. I'm not going to name it. I had a friend who went to this restaurant in Hamilton. He was looking for a job, and I said, a friend, he's younger than me. He wanted to get a job as a dishwasher, which was available. The proprietor actually offered him the job at $9 an hour as a dishwasher without gratuities. And so it got me to thinking about what globally they're calling this race to the bottom on wages, and how it is really impacting persons at the bottom of income distribution, low income, and persons, say, non-college educated, and how the adoption in Bermuda particularly, but throughout the West in particular, of low-cost foreign labor, source labor, has exacerbated this trend. All right, so in 2016, I put forth a motion before the House of Assembly. The motion, to my delight, was passed, and a joint select committee was formed. A joint select committee means it's a committee that's being comprised of both the members from both the upper and lower house. So we had senators on the committee, we had members of the House of Assembly. Also, we had a bipartisan committee. So when we talk about this comment in the throne speech, that was preceded in our election platform in support of the living wage. But it was also in the OBA's platform in support of the living wage. OBA members from the then government, now opposition, were on the committee. And so for me, that was one of the more positive aspects of the whole journey, in that this initiative enjoyed bipartisan support. Unfortunately, when it came to 2017's election, the work of that committee had not finished. I was unable to bring to the House the final report. After the election, as per the comments by the new government, as I read earlier, we were able to begin the journey again and start a new committee. We were able to bring that to fruition with a final report that included a number of key recommendations. Firstly, however, just to give you some background on the difference between a living and a minimum wage, as the minister had opined. A living wage is the amount of income necessary to afford a worker and his household a decent standard of living, based upon the respective cost of living in any particular locale or jurisdiction. It is a calculated wage that should provide for food, housing, clothing, as a basic measure of need. But in addition, items such as medical care, children's education, transportation needs, and in some calculations, savings for the future can also be included in calculating that living wage. By way of contrast, a minimum wage, on the other hand, is a wage set by law that generally does not take into account the cost of living within a particular locale or jurisdiction, but which is designed at the very least to place a minimum wage floor under the most vulnerable of workers. It represents the minimum amount that an employer is legally mandated to pay an employee. So very quickly, many of you may have heard, we did come with a set of recommendations that also not only called for a living wage, but put forth a recommendation that in phase one, we would also have a minimum wage. Originally, it was designed to ensure that persons earning gratuities and commissions, persons who were living domestics, and others would be able, the most vulnerable workers amongst us, in my opinion, would be able to get more immediate relief. But we also, as a recommendation, called for the creation of a wage commission, which you'll hear more about later. The wage commission is designed to calculate wages all across most jurisdictions who have these statutory wages. They usually allow for this body of experts, along with others, to calculate the methodology or adopt the methodology that they're going to use to calculate the wage and to come with the calculations that will then be implemented statutorily or under law. So that was another recommendation. The committee itself also put forth two recommendations that are what I would call non-statutory wage recommendations, but that would also improve the employment prospects of Bermudians and the conditions under which they work. So I don't know if many of you realize this, but under the Occupational Pensions Act, for example, there's no provision that persons who are here on work permits pay into the private pensions that all of you pay into as employees. So for example, if an employer has a foreign worker, he does not have to pay that 5%, remember it's 10%, 5 from the employee and 5% from the employer, into the private pensions or Occupational Pensions Act. To me, that created a perverse incentive on the part of employers not to hire Bermudians, to move heaven and earth not to do so. They call that a perverse incentive. There's another one. Under the Employment Act 2000, for example, an employer can, I think, as per the Act, has a get-out-of-jail-free card on the issue of overtime pay. The Act simply states that under Section 9, that Act simply states that if an employer can get a assent or agreement from an employee to not require overtime pay, the employer is under no obligation to pay it. So you can see how over the last 20 years since that was enacted, how potentially has led to significant abuse. The Act and the provision I've cited does not even require that it be in writing, for example. So these are the type of systemic challenges that we need to address beyond just the fact of putting in place a statutory wage, whether it's a minimum or a living wage. And I might just add that over 190 countries have some form of statutory wage rates. Even Cayman Islands, that we always compare ourselves to, implemented a minimum wage, too low by my standards, I might add, but they have beat us to the punch even on that. Now, tonight we're going to have what I call a sort of, not informal, but we're all going to sit here at the table. We have 4 great panelists here. They've been given the Riot Act that, 7 minutes in length would be the maximum time allotted for them to make their presentations. And the order of speaking will start with Mr. Phil Parentchief, followed by Mr. Nathan Kowalski, followed by Cordell Riley, and Mr. Chris Furbett. So I think we'll get right to it. If there are any other questions with respect to the recommendations from the report, I might just add that the government was under no obligation to accept or adopt any of the recommendations coming out of the Joint Select Committee, which may be apropos for many of you. You've heard about the Joint Select Committee or a committee that was formed, a parliamentary committee in the UK, which made some very odious recommendations about Bermuda, on same-sex marriage, and the other one was on immigration, mandating or recommending that British people who come here be allowed to vote, hold office, etc. But those are the recommendations of a committee. The government in the UK has no obligation to accept them. They may, and we're still waiting on that. Well, it's the same thing here. But what is very has given me a lot of confidence is that the minister has been a strong advocate for us, and the government has signed on to adopting and coming with legislation that will implement many of the recommendations that we put forth. Okay, so thank you for that and your indulgence. A little background. If you need any questions on that area, I'm more than willing to address them later. And I'm going to welcome now the opening speaker, Mr. Phil Parentchief, to give his presentation.
Thank you very much. Let me know if I'm speaking either too low or too loudly, because at the moment I'm suffering from a bit of cold in my ears. But just let me know if I'm not coming over. I have 5 to 7 minutes, and I thought that given the information that I have, because I'm trying to disseminate as much information as possible, I'm going to read most of it, if not all of it. Some of it has been said both by the Minister and Mr. Commission, so bear with me. I have decided to tackle my task, the process for the establishment of the minimum and living wage, by dividing it into 2 parts. The 2 parts are macro and micro basis, that is the larger picture, which in my view we have begun, and the more micro or smaller picture, which is what the Wage Commission that hopefully will soon be struck will be dealing with. They are the more detailed sector. But in any event, briefly, this process for establishing the minimum and living wage is going to be in a micro and macro process. I'll deal with the macro first. The macro process has, in fact, already begun. And it begun when the Joint Select Committee, Parliamentary Joint Select Committee, in fact, produced this report. This report can be found, I believe, on the government website. I think I'm correct on that. So that was the beginning. In fact, that process has now resumed with your presence and your participation here this evening. Because this conversation really has to get going, and I do thank you for coming out. But your views and the inputs of others from further public and indeed private meetings, social media, mainstream, electronic, and print media will be collated, analyzed, and shared with the Wage Commission. And the Wage Commission is the next step. That Wage Commission itself will hold public meetings. It will entertain presentations from experts and others in the field. That Wage Commission will be examining these findings against the best possible data, the best possible research, and will give reports on our economy, our commerce, our financial affairs that we can get to, and I'm hoping, in fact, that the legislation that sets up the Wage Commission empowers the minister and others who need it to subpoena, if possible, documents that would be needed and that would be necessary for us being accurate in our findings. Further, the Wage Commission will, once it's completed its work, as has already been said this evening, will give its recommendations and this report to the Honorable Minister Levita Fogo for onward progress through the government, and indeed will result in a robust debate, no doubt, in the Parliament, and that will culminate in the establishment, in legislation and the subsequent establishment and implementation of a minimum as well as hopefully a living wage for Bermuda. The Wage Commission intends to, I understand it, will be mandated to look at both issues as described and differentiated by Mr. Commission a bit earlier. Now, the micro approach, which is really a more technical approach, you can tell me how much time I have and I'll just move on. I'll push it on. But the micro approach, or the nitty-gritty approach, I call it, this is where things get more technical. A number of questions will arise requiring precise and accurate answers. Issues such as the establishment of a true and representative poverty datum line, a PDL, in Bermuda circumstances. What components, for instance, constitute or make up cost of living? What is a reasonable profit margin or markup that a given entrepreneur, merchant, or professional should make or charge? 100%, 200%, 500%? What's reasonable? What's a fair and representative standard basket of goods, services that are necessary to achieve and sustain a universally considered and accepted quality of life, and to firstly put Bermuda and Bermudians in a position whereby they can enjoy a quality of life and, in fact, be able to enjoy leisure time. What is the percentage of a given person's wage, for example, after purchasing this standard quality basket of goods and services should be left over as disposable income for that person to enjoy the leisure time I mentioned earlier? Should the approximately 14,000 international companies making millions and even billions of untaxed dollars annually be appropriately taxed in the effort to lower our astronomical world's highest cost of living? If so, how much should they be taxed? And the larger institutions, such as the banks and BF&M, who are featured in the news today, and other financial institutions declaring untaxed profits. And I'm talking about the tax on capital gains, investments, profits, dividends. I'm not talking about the domestic taxes, consumption taxes. But those who declare in a quarter 15 million, 50 million year over year. Remember that the idea is that we are trying to bring down or reduce the cost of living. Then we'll be in a better position to pitch the minimum and the living wage at a point whereby the two may converge, or indeed one, i.e. the minimum wage, may one day become the living wage. Many European countries, as has been announced, are dealing with this, Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark. There's some also, I think, Canada, so on the universal base income, similar. But anyway, we in Bermuda have a per capita, or had a per capita income of $96,015 in 2015. Seems to me that should we pay out to every adult or perhaps household at least $75,000 annually, or just over $6,000 per month, given Bermuda's cost of living, that they would then enjoy a reasonable quality of life and remain above what I've established conservatively to be the poverty datum line of approximately $50,000 to $55,000, which translates for us about $1,000 a week for a 50-week year with 2 weeks vacation. I should say in conclusion that we as a society and on the whole have to really, I'll be kind, but grow a pair and actually distribute the wealth of this society through an equitable, appropriate, progressive, and proportionate corporate and fair and flat tax. And I'm talking about corporate tax, not personal. I'm not talking about payroll tax. Abolish them. We are in a society which can and must do better than having a homeless man, as we had 4 homeless men dying within 3 months, and another making a plaintive cry, I believe 2 days ago, that stray dogs and murderers are in fact treated better than he is being treated. And the sad part about that is that he's largely right, no matter what you think about how he landed in that predicament. So let's get on with the conversation. Let's move it on. We're way late. We're long, long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parent Chief. Give him another round of applause, please, everyone. Our next presenter is going to be Mr. Nathan Kowalski. Mr. Kowalski, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. A couple of things before I begin. These are my comments, so if the press could be very careful not to say, this is Nathan of the Bermuda Chamber of Commerce. They will make their own comments. Other boards I sit on will make their own comments. If you don't like what I say, just get mad at Nate. If you like what I say, great. These are my comments. I just don't want to be attributed to any company or board or something like that, so just so the press knows. Okay, so I have a written statement I'm going to try to rattle through. I know I only got about 5 minutes, so I'll try to... 7 minutes, okay. So last few decades have been pretty tough for labor. That's undeniable. So shifting macroeconomic forces have tilted the playing field in the economy toward capital and created a more difficult environment for real wage growth and opportunities. According to the recent Federal Reserve data, corporate pre-tax profits have grown from 5% to about 9% of U.S. GDP since the late 1990s, while wages have shrunk from 46 to 43. So there's been many reasons for this shift, and it's going to be impossible for me to sit here in 5 minutes to pin it down to 1 or 2 major aspects, but I'm just going to talk about a couple to consider as well. Low interest rates have enabled zombie companies around the world to perpetuate and frustrate productivity, growth, and efficient allocation of capital. And lower productivity limits wage growth everywhere. The scalability and automation of jobs through technology has created destruction and shifted the nature of work for many industries and has left many with little to no bargaining power when it comes to some of these jobs. And the mix of jobs is shifting, and the speed of this mix is accelerating. So partially due to regulation and network effects, there's also a winner-takes-all market in some industries that has fostered monopolies and oligopolies that we all know. And these groups can stifle competition and control pricing in many areas at the expense of a competitive major markets in labor. So the unfortunate news is a lot of these things I'm talking about don't look like they're going to improve dramatically in the medium term. If you look at the recent OECD study, 14% of jobs could disappear from automation in the next 15 to 20 years. 32% will likely change radically due to automation. 1 in 7 workers are now self-employed, and 1 in 9 are on temporary contracts. This is the gig economy that everyone talks about. And 6 out of 10 workers lack basic IT skills, and union membership has fallen by almost a half over the past 3 decades. So all these things I've mentioned have exacerbated inequality, right? And created levels of inequality that we actually haven't seen since 1929. And this inequality has obviously frustrated workers, and it does come at a cost. Inequality does slow GDP. There's many studies that I could mention, but I'm not going to spend the next 15 minutes on that, but it does. And we've gotten to the point where throughout the world, many even question capitalism itself. Now you should all gasp at that, but I don't know if we're going to do that this evening. But so why do I mention these? Why am I talking about this on a day when we're supposed to be talking about minimum wage and living wage, right? It's because I think these are huge issues for Bermuda, huge issues. And they might be the most important thing that we actually need to consider. Because I'll say one thing, you cannot, of course, benefit from a minimum wage if there's no wage to be had. So these aspects have to be considered, and we have to think about that. So let me end with some discussion on the potential economic impact of minimum wage. There's some obviously good things that I hope other panelists will touch on, but I'm going to talk about a recent and very timely and relevant survey actually that came out of the United States from a software group called Harris, okay? It was the 2019 Hospitality and Food Service Wage Inflation Survey. That's a mouthful. But many states in the U.S. have embarked on various forms of minimum wage laws. So Harry decided to survey 173 restaurants and over 112,000 employees across the U.S. between February and March of this year, and asked them about the impact of rising in minimum wage. The respondents represent more than 4,000 restaurant locations ranging from fine food to fast food, and this is what they found. So they found to combat the increased labor costs, the report said, almost 2/3, or 64% in this case, reduced employee hours. 27 eliminated ancillary positions. 26 deployed new technology. Almost half, 46%, reworked food and beverage offerings to reduce cost. 71% of operators raised menu prices. 43% eliminated jobs. And 9% actually closed locations. So this doesn't guarantee that this happens in Bermuda, but what I'm trying to do here is show the potential outcomes of a minimum wage law. And I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure. Let's get that. But these are unintended consequences that can happen. So it's also worth noting that these are potential observations that we are noting for sure, like that we're talking about, right? But there's more. And I'm going to use the French economist Frédéric Bastiat, who's famous for the concept of that which is seen and that which is not seen when it comes to economics. So he talks to how many will miss the unintended consequences brought about by economic policies because there's no direct observable effect, right? That's why it's super, super critical that we get this right and that we don't create a system that curtails lower skill or youth employment and creates a country where we have no idea how many jobs were never created because of the policies we implemented. So I would just urge that and end by saying the successful implementation of this policy will really be determined by the process and the details that are involved in setting any wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. This time we're going to have our final speaker, and then we'll be going to questions and answer. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Mr. Riley, my good friend, too. So at this time, I want to hand the mic over to the president of the Bermuda Industrial Union, Mr. Chris Furbett. Thank you. The future president of the BIU, Mr. Cordell Riley.
Good luck with that, yeah. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. My role this evening is to look at the various methodologies for calculating a minimum wage. I think I want to start off, though, by looking at why would have a livable wage. I think some of the other speakers have covered that area. We operate as Mr. Kowalski mentioned, in a capitalist society. And in a capitalist society, profit is king. And so when profit is king, people just become part of the equation. And so there is more focus on making a profit and less on the humanity of people. And so when you have such a situation, you will have vast gaps in wages. I think there was something about before the CEO used to earn 200 times more than the lowest paid employee. Now it could be 1,000 times more. So it has gone off the deep end. And as is alluded to as well, increases in technology and all these things are going to create less of an opportunity. And of course, there's a greater push to move towards technology and to take individuals out of the equation. And so that as a backdrop has caused governments to look at how can we lift people out of poverty. And by lifting people out of poverty, let me just say that there is this notion that because one is poor, one must be lazy. That is completely and utterly untrue. So the fact that you are helping people out of poverty does not mean that you are giving them a disincentive to work. The vast majority of those in poverty would like to get out of their situation and would take jobs if given the opportunity. So this is really about human dignity. And so if I stick to what I've been asked to do, what do you use? I mean, there are a number of methodologies. There's a relative low income threshold. There's a low income cutoff threshold. There's a low income threshold. There's many methodologies. But a lot of these methodologies are based on the fact that the countries that have them have income tax. We do not have income tax. So therefore, a method for Bermuda has to be almost wholesale drawn. So normally what goes into the calculation of a minimum or a livable wage is the size of one's household, rent, food, travel, taxes, and clothes, and the like. And so the point of a living wage is to make sure that every individual stays several levels above the poverty level. In other words, that people can live with dignity. And so when we go into these calculations, persons or governments that have a greater compassion for their citizens will look at how we can keep them above poverty level. So when we were asked to submit to the commission in 2016, whatever methodologies that we used, we came up fairly close in terms of what the hourly wage would be, around $18, except me. My calculation came out to almost $24 an hour, 2016. And of course, I was basing it on the household expenditure survey, and of course that data is available between black households and white households. When I separated the two, white households were at $30 an hour, and black households were at $18.75. So if we took my calculation for blacks, then the $18 range, everybody was within about $1 or so of what an hourly wage or livable wage would look like in Bermuda. So those are some of the things that it must look into. Again, healthcare, all of those things we have to look at in terms of what is the expenditure of household or whatever the expenditure of individuals, because that's the other thing too, because a household that has 2 children and 2 parents is going to have different needs from a household that has a single person. So all of these things are going to have to take into consideration. If we had income tax, we would have up-to-date data, and we can easily come up with a figure. Without that, we're going to have to use the data that we have. And I just want to make it clear that the getting people out of poverty is not getting them to live in the Dom Perignon or the steak and filet mignon type of lifestyle. Because, for instance, the living wage framework for Canada, it says that it should not include the credit card loans or any debts or interest that you have to pay. It doesn't include savings for retirement. It doesn't include owning a home. So you're getting above the poverty level, but you're still saying that it's not intended for you to own a home. It's not intended for you to save for your children's future education. It's not intended for anything other than basic recreation. It doesn't include costs for caring for the disabled or seriously ill or anything like that. And it only has a minimum amount for a cushion for emergencies or hard times. So that was the Canadian living wage framework. And so you can see that that is at the very, very minimum. I don't know how many can live without some sort of cushion for a rainy day, although I know many, many do. So when we talk about a living wage, these are the kinds of considerations that have to go into it. And so we do have to come up something unique for Bermuda, because otherwise people will find themselves living without humanity, and there is a lot of social costs attributed to that. This was given to me today by someone sitting at this table about a study done in the United States where the implementation of a living wage helped to reduce suicide, because persons who feel that they have no hope decide that they're just going to end it quickly. But if you take them out of this level of poverty and they have something that gives them a little bit of hope, that they can continue on. And so we have to look at all aspects of this livable wage. It's something new for Bermuda, and obviously there's a lot of apprehension about it. But the fact that many other countries have gone down this road means that in this, what we call affluent society, this is something that we should be able to take if we are very much concerned about the humanity of our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Okay, at this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Mr. Chris Furbett, current president of the BIU. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. First of all, let me say good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it is indeed a pleasure to be here on behalf of the BIU to make a presentation this evening on a living wage. And as I think all the other speakers have said, you know, it is going to be extremely challenging. But I would say that, you know, when we look at the predicament that we find ourselves in, it didn't happen overnight. We're not going to be able to fix it overnight. And contrary to what you might think, this didn't happen over the last decade. It didn't happen over the last 2 decades. It started way back in 1974. So if we don't start right, we can't get it right. Certainly, I think from the position of the BIU, we believe, this is our opinion, and it may not be correct, the cost of living in this country is too high. That's why so many people find it hard to make ends meet. Particularly when you look at some of our seniors who are 70 and 80 years of age, who say that, and some people who are, let's say, 60 and 70 years of age, who was getting a paycheck 40 years ago, and they say the paycheck I was getting 40 years ago went farther than my paycheck is getting today. And the reason why that is true, you would notice over this 39-year period, and the only reason why I'm dealing with 39 years, because the data that I'm dealing with is the 3 household expenditure documents that has been produced by the government, or by the government statistical department. That was in 1993, 2004, and 2013. And what happens over this period of time, over this 39-year period, from 1974 to 2013, you see where all the damage is done in wages. For whatever reason, and this is my description, for whatever reason, the household expenditure was allowed to outpace the rate of inflation. So when the BIU or the other unions are going to the bargaining table thinking, well, the rate of inflation is 2%. If I get my numbers at 2.5% wage increase or 2.2 above the rate of inflation, we should be okay. Got news for you. I'm going to handout for you, but I'm not going to hand it out now. You get my handout, get the handout when I'm finished. Certainly, when you get it, you would notice that the consumer price index and these numbers that I have on the consumer price index is taken right from the government. I asked them for the consumer price index way back from 1961 to current. So all the numbers for the consumer price index are not numbers the BRU put out here. These are factual numbers. So when we say that the consumer price index actually went up 165% cumulative effect from 1974 to 2013, that's what it went up by, 165%. The cumulative effect of the household expenditure went up 222%. That's why you heard the government, and you've heard other, I guess, countries around the world talking about healthcare costs. There are 4 big items in the household expenditure that's totally, I guess, what you would call eviscerated the consumer price index. We know that the cost of rent probably went up let me get the correct number for you. Consumer price index 165, right? Education went up by 295%. Travel costs 214%. Healthcare costs 284%. Remember now, CPI went up 165. Health insurance costs went up by 284% over the same period of time. Housing, 165 for the consumer price index, 257% for housing. And everybody's wondering what happened to wages. Quick example. Here's a worker, these are real wages. Here's a worker in 1974 who earned $162 a week. 48% of his salary took care of housing, education, medical, and entertainment. There's 4 items. In 2013, it takes 70% of his wages to take care of them 4 items. 70% of his wages. So certainly, when we sit down and look at all the information that needs to be looked at, and certainly we do have this document, which is the Consumer Price Index. Interesting because, you know, they speak about there are 9 items in the index, or that is used to calculate the numbers, the information. But if you go to the household expenditure, you'll see 11 items. You might say, well, why is it a contrast? The reason why you'll see that transportation, foreign travel are together. The other one is together is education, recreation, entertainment, and reading. There's 2 are together. So if you separate them 2 out, you get 11. So when you go to the household expenditure, it's these 3 documents. This one's 1993. When you go in here, you see it's 11. If you go in there, you'll see 9. But certainly, I think it has been mentioned that maybe we have to look at a different way of calculating the cost. Because certainly what we found is that because these documents are only produced every 10 years, I just gave you the 1993, 2004, the last one's 2013. So you won't get another one like this to probably 2023 or 24. And we have to establish now how we're going to get these on a more regular basis, rather we get them every 3 years, every 5 years, because right now, you know, we're kind of like chasing, we're trying to catch our tail. Or respectfully, the horse is out of the stable and we're trying to catch him. Good luck. You run pretty fast. Back in the day, some of us could run pretty fast, but whether we can catch that horse or not, I'm not sure. So certainly, most of these problems that we see in front of us, as I said a moment ago, was created over the last 4 decades. Things haven't been all that bad as far as, because all the damage was done between 1974 and probably around about 2005. Things have kind of like leveled off. Even though they've leveled off, a lot of people think food has gone through the roof. I can tell you up until 2013, food cost was only 157% when we look at the consumer price index. The index is 165, food was under that. That's up to 2013 now. Remember now, we've got 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And so a lot of things has happened over the last 4 years as relates to food. So It's up to us now to just sit down and have real conversation like other countries all around the world are doing now, having this conversation about inequality, having a conversation about what? Disposable income. Because right now, there's at least probably 40, 50, 60% of Barbadians that don't have any disposable income. That's a recipe for disaster. You see other countries around the world, people are rioting in the streets because they had enough. I certainly hope we never have to come to that in this country. So certainly I'm willing to entertain any questions you might have. Certainly I'll get this handout to be given to you. I want to make just one correction to the handout. You'll notice that in paragraph number 3, particularly at the end sentence, it clearly states that the consumer price index over this period of time increased by 165% cumulative, while the household expenditure increased by 221%. And here's where the change comes. The difference between it should be, instead of 2, the word should be the. So I just need you to make that minor correction for me when I hand it out to you. In paragraph number 3, the word should be the instead of 2. Everything else, I believe it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furbit. We're going to go to the question and answer period right now, but very quickly, I just want to say, you know, there always will be individuals who will say the sky is going to fall when you implement statutory wages, whether it's a minimum or living wages. But to find real-world examples of that having happened is very rare. So, for example, in Germany, the economists there were predicting that there would be $200,000 200,000 jobs lost as a consequence of them for the first time putting in place statutory wages only about 4 or 5 years ago. In fact, the economy went the other way. It went into a boom. Is there any direct connection between implementing those living wages or minimum wages and the boom that ensued? No, one can't make that assertion, but certainly we didn't see a loss of jobs, we saw jobs increase. New York State, same thing. Jersey, Guernsey, we can go right down the line. A couple of years ago, for example, economists, usually conservative economists, were saying that the Seattle initiative, $15 per hour, was losing jobs, and that they came with a study that provided a eureka moment for conservative economists throughout the West and the world. Until a few months later, that study was debunked. It was irredeemably flawed. So we're still waiting for the real-world example that would confirm the worst-case scenario on the part of persons about the real-world impact of statutory or minimum and living wages. I would just say this. One thing that is always ignored is the fact that when people get more money in their pocket, particularly at the bottom of income distribution, for better or worse, they spend disproportionately more of it. And in a consumer-based economy, I think that could be good. Very quickly, before we go to the question and answer period, I just want to say that the minister and her ministry is moving ahead with this initiative. So, for example, they will move forward to establish a wage commission. Secondly, the determination and implementation of a statutory minimum wage will occur. We couldn't get it done, or they couldn't get it done this year, because the whole need to put in place the compliance and enforcement measures is going to take some time. And that has to be thought out very carefully. So in 2020, we're likely to see the implementation of a minimum wage. Thirdly, the implementation of a living wage rate by 2021, which will also be calculated by the said wage commission. And as I mentioned, what I call those non-statutory wage reforms around the overtime pay and the reform of the Occupational Pensions Act. So if anybody has questions now for any of our esteemed panel, they're ready to do their job to answer them.
And just before we go to questions, let me just say this, that we, as a government, will rely heavily on the research that the Wage Commission brings to the table. And based on that information that is provided to government is what will be used to make the determination in what direction government will move. So government has not taken a particular direction yet, except for the fact that we will establish the commission to do the research and do the work that needs to be done to bring about what a reasonable living wage should look like.
Ladies
I
and
just
gentlemen,
want to say that.
thank you, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a standing mic in the aisleway, and we also have a hand mic for those who may not wish to get up and ask a question. The floor is open.
Good evening. Thank the panelists and the comments that you've made so far. It's been very informative. I'd just like to say that Mr. Riley said that this is a capitalist country. It's also a democracy, meaning that eventually the voters will decide who's going to make what decisions. Secondly, what our community needs, and I'm talking about the black community, is capital. What we also need is the removal of barriers to entry so that we can compete, at least people that want to compete. I believe that the PLP's majority of 25 seats in Parliament, what they should be doing is removing barriers to entry so that we can compete. I believe in social and economic equality because it's the safe thing to do. In smart countries, that's what you do. You share the wealth. If you don't, you get Venezuela. I don't believe that the PLP should be using the talent that it has to tell the owners of capital what they should and should not be doing with that capital. If capital is unable to find a rate of return commensurate with the risk that they're taking, they're going to leave. So where's the government going to be then? Khalid Wasi, who writes columns often, he stated that capitalists love nothing better than people who are happy to earn a wage, because they can figure that out. Me, myself, I didn't want to really go into this, but I started a company, a mutual insurance company, that we generated our own capital. We're still successful, but we were attacked by certain people in this country all the way to Parliament. It was actually a pleasure that you had people in Parliament that would call my name, call me a shyster, a crook, a fly-by-night in Parliament, where you have people in the government that are willing to change laws to stop people. To me, again, it was a pleasure. They were unsuccessful in doing it, but they actually attempted to do it. Now, with regard to debt, which most people are carrying, debt is like the new slavery. And with regard to slavery, I don't think that people were free because someone was happy to free us. People were killing people, right? You look at that statue down on Front Street, that's how you get freedom. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying that that's what happens. Again, you can go back to Venezuela. So really my question is, where's the government going to be if the capital flees? I think as this gentleman said, that they decide to go, there's no wages, so what do you have then? Thank you.
Can I take this first? Okay. I got a whole bunch of things I'd like to say. First of all, on Ms. Young's comment on the studies on minimum wage, the honest truth is, Rolf, the honest truth is, they're not definitive at all, either way. So for every study you say debunks it, I'll show you a study that it's caused a problem. So let's be very, very honest here. With economics, it's not physics or math, okay? It's not 2 + 2 = 4. A lot of people will tell you that that's how it works, but it's not true, right? It's not exact. It's not nowhere near exact. There's all kinds of issues involved, okay? So the real honest truth on minimum wage studies is there is no definitive study. So don't let anyone tell you, oh, these 5 studies say this. Well, I can show you 5 that say the other, okay? And both of us are wrong, to be honest, right? It's not either or, okay? So let's just make that really, really, really clear. The other thing, the gentleman on Venezuela. Venezuela is socialist, okay? So if you don't want Venezuela, then you don't want socialism, and you don't want Maoist China, and you don't want pre-Russia than we have now, right? That is an unmitigated disaster. We all know what happens when government does get involved and set prices and does things. It is a disaster. We do not want that. That is definitive because none of them have worked. So You can show me any study. It doesn't work. Socialism, not a way to do it. Now, more equal sharing of things, how we do things, that's another story. But socialism, no. That's a scary, scary thing. As for capital, you're right. You want to make it attractive for capital here. You want to make it easier to get capital. And I agree with you with rules and regulation. You know what's happening in the United States. They roll back taxes and they roll back rules and regulation, and it's booming. Wages are going up. Unemployment's at a 50-year low. Unemployment's at a 50-year low. That's why wages are going up. And employers are fighting for employees. One of the biggest concerns of small business in the United States is retaining and getting the right workers. They're fighting for them. And that's why wages and benefits are going up. So a strong employment market in a booming economy with low unemployment is great for workers. Workers have the shift of power shifts to workers. That's how it works, right? If you have a slow, anemic economy where capital is fleeing, we're in big trouble. There is no bargaining power for labor in that market because there's no labor. So, we really want to kind of work around making sure this economy is strong, and there is capital and investment, and we're booming and the economy is going well, because I think then it's a major benefit for all labor and wages.
Does any one of the other panelists wish to speak? Mr. you want to speak to me?
Well, I certainly don't share Mr. Kowalski's conclusion that socialism doesn't work. The United States now is heavily indebted to China. I don't want to go into it, but because that's on the political front. Capitalism actually doesn't work. Unbridled capitalism is what we have in Bermuda, and it certainly doesn't work. There's not even the welfare checks and the welfare systems and other checks and balances on unbridled capitalism that exists in Canada, United States, and in the UK, in this country. And that's because the date that the president mentioned, 1974, as where the problem began, actually the problem began in 1616, 1620, because this economy was never based on equality. It was always a vertical system that empowered those at the top. It does that now. Flight of capital. The reality of that is simply that the latest European substance requirement challenge, for which unfortunately Bermuda is currently on the blacklist, talks about real economic substance. That's because over 14,000 of our international companies, there are many amongst them, because it goes along a wide swath of companies, do not in fact have real economic presence here in Bermuda. In fact, if you Google 666, you'll find a story there where Google had a post office box in this country, in Hamilton, which was actually administered by a Coden trustee, just a post box, making millions of dollars annually. That went back. I don't want to get into triangulation and the rest of the artifices that many of these companies in this country use. So there will be no flight of capital. In fact, if you're talking about taxation, we have zero taxation. The next jurisdiction is Ireland with 12.5%. So where is capital going to flee? Capital will actually operate in hell as long as it's making a profit. So for me, please, let's not get into whether capitalism good, socialism bad. The situation I don't want to get into about Venezuela either, because there's another side of that where the opposition leader is really being characterized as a puppeteer of American capitalism. So here we are. That's it.
The only thing I'll add to that is that there are concerns even in capitalist societies with capitalism, and now you hear talk of compassionate capitalism. So there is a will to reform it, but those, they still want to hold on to it. But in terms of how it's working out, the wealth between blacks and whites have widened. It's going from 1/10, blacks have 1/10 of the wealth of whites in the United States to now 1/20th of the wealth. So the gap is getting wider, the 1% becoming richer, and even in Bermuda, if you look at our data, you'll see the gap between blacks and whites are actually widening, not getting closer.
Are there any questions? I'm sorry. Questions from the floor?
Good evening, everybody. I believe that the reality of a good discourse is to understand both sides of the coin, as it were. And so my challenge to each of you is to take the opposing side and inform the person that are currently here. So for Mr. Kowalski, for example, I will take from what you said that you think that the implementation of a livable wage is going to be negative. Yeah, and so what I want you to do, what I'm going to challenge you to do, is to flip that and tell me what is the potential positives of doing so. And for the rest of you to do the other side. And be concise. And part of my reasoning also is because it is factual that Bermuda has very little data upon which to act. That's my request.
Just before Mr. Kowalski and anybody else speaks, certainly I think that if you look at all the information that we have, certainly if the cost of living is too high in Bermuda, we simply can't go to an employer and say, well, you need to bring this person's wages up by, let's just say 25%. I'm going to pick that number. So if I'm running a company and I'm just about making a 25% profit in my company, you're now telling me take my entire profit now and put it into wages. You know what happens to my business in the next year? It goes out of business. So the problem that we have in looking at this whole question about a livable wage is we need to bring wages up, maybe a slight bit, whether it's by 5 or 10%, somewhere in that range. The cost of living has got to come back down. That's the only way it could be done. How Seeky done it? How could Seeky done it back in 2014? If you go look at the numbers, it will show you that, and I think they used euro. They were paying 2,000 euro a month. Now they're back down to paying just over 1,400 euro a month. They reduced the cost of rent, the cost of food, everything came back down. Now how do we, and we've got many pieces of this puzzle to put together to get there. You can't just put one piece because that's not going to work. I heard what Mr. Parenti said, but remember now, I don't have any data that goes back 400 years ago. I'm dealing with the data that's in front of me that goes back to 1974. You want to give me something that goes back post-1974? We can look at that. So the comparison that the BIU is making is looking at all the information that's in front of us based on what the BIU members were earning back in 1974 and compared it to what they're now making in 2013. I'm telling you that, I'll give you an example. One worker in government who was a foreman, depot foreman, still a depot foreman today. In 1974, his basic salary a week was $226 a week. The household expenses was $215. He covered the whole expenses all by himself. He didn't need his wife's help. He didn't need his son's help. He didn't need nobody's help back in 1974. If you wind the clock forward to 2013, he went from having a $10 disposable income to now being $550 behind the household expenditure. Because the household expense now, $1,807, his wage is $1,300. So he's $500 behind. He went from being $10 here to $500 behind. Why? Because of all those things that was allowed to outpace the rate of inflation, which is what the household expense did, and drove the workers' wages into the dumps. So we're going to have that conversation about putting all the pieces in. You leave one piece out, it's going to fall apart.
Any other questions from the floor?
Can I, oh, sorry. Yeah. My answer is really quick because I appreciate the concept of having dual thought. I think it's really important. I think one of the problems we have this year, is recently in everything is this kind of bifurcation and polarization of ideas. And we need to get, I agree with you 100%. We need to get away from that. This is right, this is wrong. I'm on this side, I'm in this party, I believe this. It's ridiculous. It doesn't lead to anything, it never solves the problems, right? So to your point of what's good of a minimum wage, well, it's already been said, really, and I do agree with it. If you put more money into the hands of people that need it, they will spend it. And so obviously it does boost the economy a lot more than, say, giving a rich guy more money. Okay, I actually, believe it or not, am not a believer of trickle-down economics. I do not think that giving rich people more money that they sprinkle down affects the economy nowhere near giving someone that needs the money to spend it. So I'm not against that concept. I'm not a heartless capitalist as I might be trying to be portrayed today. I do appreciate that there is some benefits to it. But like everything, it's a balance, right? It can't go too far where we scare everything away, shut down businesses, and become a banana republic. But we also need to take care of our people.
I would just say this, that I'm staying on my tack. So during this boom in the U.S., precipitated by the tax cuts and the rest, you've had a concomitant rise in minimum wages. You've all heard about the fight for 15. So this has been taken at the same time, and it doesn't appear to have hurt the U.S. economy. And has been growing in momentum, and it will continue over the next few years. Are there any persons else that would want to speak? Mr. Swan, go ahead. MP Swan, good to have you here.
Good evening, and thank you for the discussion this evening. I couldn't help but cast my mind to quality of life, and I noticed that the countries that enjoy the highest quality of life for its citizens start with Finland and Canada and Denmark and Australia and Switzerland, and people are able to live with dignity. And in a country that brags about punching above its weight, has a very high percentage of citizens that can't enjoy that. And it's very difficult for our people. And the question I want to ask, and I appreciate, I've listened to the President, Mr. Herbert, speak many times about how the shift, how do we cause the 1% that marvel in this Bermuda economy appreciate that something has to change for the average person in Bermuda who are living in this fishbowl? And it's very painful to see that. And poverty in Bermuda is masked by our affluence, but it's starting to show itself out as you walk around Bermuda. And that's the challenge for the 1% in Bermuda and for those who can benefit from the 1%, because a very high percentage of Bermudians and an increasingly high percent of Bermudians don't live what I grew up on. 1 week's wage equals what? 1 month's rent. We're going way past that, and as a consequence, unless persons double up with family members, there's no way to survive. And I'm asking that question, how can the sensitivity come where people can appreciate that in this 65,000 or thereabouts population, a very high percentage of people, disproportionately black, are living that reality, and the empathy from those who are doing well, thank you very much, and the legacy of having it passed down needs to show compassion to this economy. And so I'm appealing, Mr. Kowalski, I'm appealing because if the 1% mindset can embrace some compassion towards the Bermudians, who aren't many compared to what happens, because we know if Google's here with a mailbox, there are a lot of scenarios we just don't know about. So I'm appealing for an understanding and appreciation, and I applaud the chairman for advocating for this. But the conversation needs to go far beyond. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, the problem that we have is it was made clear last week or week before last. Butterfield's Bank made profits of almost $200 million per year, and they let go 41 people. And what they're going to do to those jobs they farmed out of Bermuda? Take them to a poor country and get them for almost nothing. They have no interest in the people of this country or the country. It's about profit. Now, and that's why 98% of the world's wealth is owned by 2%. They don't make no sense, you know. And then, you know, semi-socialist works in some countries. You take the health care system in the UK, Canada, Portugal, it's semi-socialist. But when you take Bermuda and United States, the health care cost is the highest in the world. Why? Because it's controlled by the private sector. Exactly. And until we take our healthcare system in the then we can get it right. Because when if you look at the rates when you go to the doctor, what you're paying, it's terrible. England got a good healthcare system. Portugal's got a good healthcare system, and Canada. I really don't know. I'm asking my folks now, why are we using the United States? That doesn't help to lowering our healthcare costs, you know. So the thing is, in Bermuda, too many companies are making a lot of money. Not all of them now, and they're not paying the money. We've got to close that disparity of wealth to those that have it, to those that don't have it. Because let me say that as long as people are in poverty, no country is safe. So what you want to do, an ideal country, is to make everybody safe, regardless of who you are. And you make that safe by making living comfortable for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furbert. Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Furbert, do you wish to?
Certainly to, just briefly to what Mr. Swan was speaking about. Now, the handout that I gave you, if you go to the second last page, it's page number 19 right at the very top. You go right down the bottom of that page, you'll see a little yellow box, a little orange and yellow box. Certainly, as we have this conversation about what is that number going on, it's the very last page. The very last page. You got it? That's in there, right in the handout I gave you. Yes. The very last page. So, we heard, you heard it tonight, $18. You heard 25. You heard maybe 26. This is the number that I was telling you about, who earned $226 back in 1974. Look what happens in 2013. He's now $532 behind the expenditure. You know what his hourly wage is? $34 an hour. He's making $34 an hour now. So you can see why, unless we could bring the cost of living down, the livable wage would have to be about $40 an hour, to be fair. You might want to make it 35. But at 35, you're still going to be about $400 or so behind that $1,800. Now, let's just be clear, because some people will tell you, well, the $1,800 is for both races. It's for blacks and whites. Let's put the black number out there now. The black number is about $1,650. So if you want to say $1,650 and it's making 13, it's still $300 and something short. It's still short. So somehow or other, we're going to have this real conversation about how we're going to fix this. And as I said, there's no way you can convince an employer that I can afford to give everybody a 25 or 30% raise. The cost of living has to come down, and this speaks to it. Because certainly, finally, for this member that I'm telling you about now, if I go back to 1973, he was earning $17.50 an hour back in 1993, which is 26 years ago. He was earning $17.50 an hour. So I don't know where these other numbers are coming from, $18 and $17 and $25. I can tell you that if we're going to talk about livable wage, provided we bring down the cost of living, that minimum living wage is probably going to be somewhere between $30 to $35, straight up.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief. I want to actually reiterate what the President just said. Unless and until we examine very closely the components of what makes up the cost of living in this country, we are going to be chasing our tails, quite frankly. And part of that, and a large part of that cost of living is profits. And unless and until we examine, and I gave it earlier in my address, what is a reasonable profit? I cannot disclose some of these things, but in representing in certain clients in another calling that I have witnessed 400% and 500% markups, quite frankly. And every time we mark up, we are increasing the cost of living. And that is why we have to examine very closely what is a reasonable profit, because profit is the other side of the coin of wage, quite frankly, in a large measure. And I make this comment because you hear the SAGE Commission being touted all the time. And relatively speaking, it's a fine document. But it is an examination of one side of the coin. It is examination of the expenditure side. And that is why when furlough days and the rest of it were being, and days cut, and wages frozen, and moratoriums, and what have you, that was the intent of that report, because it was dealing with what was expended, and a part of that expenditure was wages. It never dealt with the other side of that coin, revenues. And that was deliberate, because when we examine revenues, we examine profits. We examine what a given entrepreneur or professional or whatever is making on top of the costs, the overheads, once they are covered. How much are they making? And quite frankly, the basket of goods and services that would give us a quality of life, in my view, must be established, they must be mandated, and criminal sanctions, in addition to civil sanctions, applied, that if that quality basket of goods is sold any higher than what has been priced, then that given merchant or professional has got to face criminal sanctions. And it's important that we take this stance because, as I said earlier, unbridled capitalism will make as much as it possibly can, and we must put a stop to that.
Senator Richardson challenged us on the panel to look on the other side. And it took my mind back to the Clinton administration, where Hillary Clinton was trying to push through a health plan for the United States. It didn't work. It was achieved under President Obama. But I recall there was one pizza company in particular that said that if this thing goes through, we're going to lay off all these people, we're going to close this and do all the other. And then when it was pushed through, never happened. It never happened. So there's always some fear surrounding it. But at the end of the day, it was reasonable. Now, it wasn't the perfect plan, but it was one workable, and they're still working through it. Last week, I was wearing another hat, and I got to meet with Lord Ahmad. as part of civil society. So I was representing Citizens Uprooting Racism. And before we were invited, we were asked, what are the 2 challenges facing our community and what were the solutions? So we had to bring that to the meeting. And when it came to our turn, we simply stated that at the last election, the then opposition ran on the notion of 2 Bermudas. And I said, if you go back to the Wooding Report in 1968 and the Pitt Report in 1977, it laid out quite clearly the path forward if you wanted to prevent 2 Bermudas. And some of the things in those reports they did, like the creation of a small business development corporation, et cetera, et cetera. But they didn't tackle the high-hanging fruit, such as income tax, wealth transference tax, all of those things which would have given the government more taxes. And to my surprise, there was some acceptance of that by Lord Ahmad. He felt that we didn't collect enough taxes in this country. And so I don't know what happens now with these ideas, but that was part of the problem because we capture a lot of money goes untaxed in this country, and therefore you have, with a declining population, you have less and less. But if we had some of those other taxes, we can still provide for those who are less fortunate, but we don't have that, so the government can't solve it. And a lot of the charities, if we had those taxes, we wouldn't have a need for them in the first place. And so we're late in the game to this, very late in the game. But we have to look at how people can live in a level of dignity. I, as among others, I'm sure, have come across stories of the challenges, and now I'm hearing more and more of the challenges that our young people are facing. And as a father with 4 children, I become concerned about the future of my own children. And so I am very concerned about what happens in Bermuda, because unlike others, I'm not planning to take off anywhere. I'm not being forced out of my country. So again, we have to look at how are we going to help those at the very lower end, because if we don't, we can have some of the challenges that happen when people feel there's no hope.
Okay. First of all, price controls. I don't even really know where to begin on this, but I think I'll have to write an article on it. That just doesn't work, right? Like, are you seriously going to go up to a business owner and tell them what they can charge? I mean, it's just not going to work. They're not going to be able to run the business. It is socialism. That's socialism to a T. So I'm just not a big fan of price controls. It's not going to work the way we think it's going to work. It's actually going to cause probably more unemployment and social unrest. So, because jobs are going to be lost, it's going to hurt the economy. I mean, you can disagree with me and you can show me what countries run really well with price controls, and maybe I'll change my mind. But please find that country for me, and then we'll discuss that. On the other things, I don't know. There's a lot been said. I think it's getting late. I'd rather hear some more questions than comment on the rest.
Mr. Pitcher, do you have a question for the panel?
Allow me just to clarify one further thing. I think this is in relationship to what I just said to you a few moments ago, and it's actually found on the 3rd last page, because this gives you an indication as to it's actually chart 6 on the 3rd last page. You can actually see a graph there where you see the expenditure starts at $215 is the blue line, and goes all the way up to 1807. And the red line is actually had those powers that be were able to control the household expenditure by the consumer price index, then the household expenditure would only be $1,077 and not $1,807. And that's real. So instead of that 221% or 222%, if you had the 165%, the household expenditure now would be $1,007. Let's just say, you know, rents and a few other things would run a bit higher. Then maybe this would probably be $1,200 or $1,300, but it won't be $1,800 if they would have controlled it the way it should have been controlled.
Mr. Pitcher?
Yeah. I have a question for the white gentleman. Mr. Kowalski, are you Bermudian? So you're a foreign worker here, and you work for an exempt company, right? Okay. I can remember, I don't know the name, and I don't know the company, that a gentleman who was a CEO of a company came to Bermuda and suggested that he, as well as others, CEOs, should be paying tax on their income. His organization, I guess it was the Chamber of Commerce, shut him down big time. You never heard from this guy again. I don't even know if he's in Bermuda. So my question to you is he still here? Okay. But he was shut down big time. You don't come to Bermuda and make these sort of statements. Okay? I believe, and I go along with Mr. Parent-Chief, that when people come here and make money in this country, they should pay a portion of that to the welfare of this country, whether it be in sports, whether it be in charities, but they should pay, because they don't come here because it's a place where they're going to experience hardships. You come here and you experience the best of things. So as an individual, do you feel that you should pay into a system that would benefit this country, not just your company and yourself? Thank you.
Okay, so do I feel I should have to pay into the system, which I do, right? I pay payroll tax, for example. So everyone that works on this island has to pay into the system. And I think that's what you mean. It's not like I'm exempt from any government taxes and fees. I still pay for those, right?
No, I'm talking about the millions of dollars that companies make. Foreign companies come here and make.
Yes, so you're saying, do we need a corporate tax?
Yes.
Oh, so you want to know about corporate tax? Well, that's a difficult one, and I actually am not going to make a statement either way because I don't know how you're going to do it, what you're going to charge, and how you're going to calculate it. So we could sit here all day and try to corner me and other people into making pontifications one way or the other, but it's not fair, right? Because there's blanketed statements. I don't know what you mean. I don't know how you're going to calculate it. So, and this would go on and on and on. So everyone's going to have their own view. I mean, I have my view on price controls, but corporate tax, you'd have to tell me how you're going to do it. Are you going to roll back payroll tax then? Maybe that's a better way to do it. So that the tax burden is shifted, possibly, but you got to tell me how you do that, right? And there's nothing wrong with let's get something straight here. There's nothing wrong with suggesting changes of how things are done here, right? But let's just not try to drag people down. Let's lift people up. That's the best way forward.
Hello? Yeah, fine, thank you. Basically, can everybody hear me? Yeah, okay. Basically, we keep hearing this diatribe, actually, but price controls don't work. Rent control is a price control. Taxi rates are a price control. Belco and the rest of it, and they do work. So it's a question of, has it ever been tried? And our economy is certainly not the same as many economies, UK, Canada, the United States. And I say that because we saw that Mr. Kowalski struggled with corporate tax. Well, corporate tax is very prevalent. In fact, it's the core of the taxation system in Western democracies. Europe and the United States, it's something as well known as apple pie in the United States. You only struggle with that in Bermuda because it means taxing the millions and billions of dollars that these companies are making in this country. In August 2012, the international IB sector declared almost $1 trillion. If you were to take roughly 1% flat tax across the bottom line, it would derive somewhere around $1.6, $1.8 billion. In August 2012, our budget was approximately 1.3, 1.4. That means a 1% flat tax would have underwritten our entire budget in this country. If that would have happened, we could have removed all taxes and levies in our taxation system in this country, which is regressive. That would have lowered the cost of living generally across the board, price levels. By lowering the price levels and the cost of living, that is tantamount to an increase of wages. That's also tantamount to an increase in savings. That would have given what Mr. Furbert is always referring to as disposable income, more disposable income. People would have bought more. We would have imported more, and more people would have been employed. The multiplier effect. And I don't want to get into whether or not this is a Keynesian economics or any other particular economist. This is an analysis of what countries do all of the time. And we have, when it's convenient for us to do so, to say that economics is not an exact science. Of course it isn't. But it is exact enough for us to set our policies by them as every other democratic country does. But we stumble and fumble when we have to apply it to Bermuda, because when you tax investments, capital gains, dividends, you are taxing the income of the rich and famous.
No, certainly, just to clarify something that Mr. Pitcher was asking, is that when Mr. Sharman, I think, was back in 2014 or 15, he mentioned that, before the IMF and the World Bank coming here, because, whether or not Bermuda is a tax jurisdiction, not a tax jurisdiction, what he was advising is that what you might want to consider, maybe scrapping the payroll tax structure and put together a corporate tax. And that corporate tax will be on profits. And he says as long as it was a reasonable figure, and I think his number was, as long as you make it about 5% or less, there's companies that are here are not getting anywhere. Because certainly I think that when you look at, and taking Mr. Kowalski's point right now, okay, what they pay in payroll tax, whether that number is 10%, 12%, or whatever, when you look at that number against what they actually made, is it 1%, is it 2%, or is it 3%? But certainly it's not 14%. And I think the reason why he suggested that, because he saw, I guess, he saw what happened just a couple of months ago. We got put on some list, right? And even though the Ministry of Finance made sure they was trying to dot the I's and cross the T, working with the BMA, the Monetary Authority, I think under successive governments, under the governments of Bermuda, whether it's been UBP, PLP, or OBA, all of them have worked well with the Bermuda Monetary Authority to make sure that we can dot those I's and cross those T's as relates to making sure we're in compliance. So certainly, as we talk about, okay, is it right
the government sets up, price control. Well, the Ministry of Finance, the 15th of every month, tells Seoul, tells Ribis how much they can charge for a gallon of fuel. You can charge less, but you can't charge any more. So if the Ministry of Finance says the 15th of May, the price of fuel is going to be $8 for the next month, if any dealer says, well, I'm going to charge $8.05, and Ministry of Finance finds out, they're probably going to give you a warning or they'll shut you down. You can charge $7.99, you can charge $7.95, but you can't charge $8.01 because they set the price of fuel. No, whether that can work for all the prices in Bermuda, I don't know. But we need to sit down and have that conversation because I see Mr. Ritson here, who's in chairman of the committee that's looking at, the price control per se, or the price commission that I think is in charge of, okay? Certainly, that's my comment based on, there's issues.
We're going to take one more. Sorry, we're going to take one more question. That's from Mr. Darrell, and then we're going to be wrapping up with final comments.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. Quite.
Okay, all right, hold a second. You don't need to demonstrate. It wasn't. No, but wait. But it wasn't intentional. Okay, so we'll take a question from. We'll take a question from you too. We'll take a question from you too.
Yeah, just let me say this. We've been talking about living wage, etc. As a matter of fact, if the wage goes up to $100 an hour, it's not going to make too much difference. It's very simple. The bottom line is this. Companies have to consider whether they want to deal with profit or consider their people. As long as they put profit over people, don't care what you do. A typical example would be the bank who recently boasted about a $50 million profit, and they make 30 people redundant. So clearly, when you put profit over people, don't make a difference how much you pay them an hour. The bottom line is the merchants have to decide to have some consideration for the people and not so much the profit. We go in business to make profit, obviously, but in Bermuda, people have been so used to making so much money, they sort of treat the backside of it, if you like. The bottom line is companies and corporations have to now consider people rather than the profit. As long as you're considering profit over people, we're always going to have this problem. All right.
Yeah, most of my questions have been asked, thanks to my good friend, MP Kim. What always confuses me about these type of meetings is that all the references, in most cases, is always referred to a survey in America or possibly Canada. And from an economic and educational standpoint, I think America is like the 23rd dumbest country in the world. Why do we keep comparing ourselves with who's dumb? CNN right now is running a program of the top 10 countries in the world where people are happy. Finland, well, you name them, mainly the Scandinavian countries. Why we never look to the best when we're looking for solutions as comparison? That's the only question I have left. Thanks very much. And thank you for having us. I think it was simply fabulous.
I just have a comment. I'm looking on this website here, and it says to be visionary, not protectionist, to achieve the highest standards of excellence, diversity, and ethics. Our vision is to cultivate the best environment in which all businesses can prosper. I think that obviously we agree that the standard of living for some is not great. And that quote came off the Chamber's website. So we need to do more work so that more people can afford a certain standard of living, because without the money, small businesses are going to close because people are not spending money, and we know that right now there is no economic growth in Bermuda. So we need to make sure that the Chamber is doing its due diligence in ensuring that we're creating a community. Also a quote on the Chamber's website, and I know you're representing you, not the Chamber, but I just want to say it's a complete community, not just for profit, but for everybody. And in fairness, like you said, let's uplift people. It is a fact that the most educated persons in Bermuda are black, but the least employed people in Bermuda are black. It is also a fact that the least employed persons in Bermuda by such a dominant force, IB, are under 25. So what are we doing to ensure the future growth of Bermuda? Because it's all going to go back to business. Because if we don't get jobs, and I mean that as a collective, not just, people that look like me, then the business will close anyway because we don't have money to spend.
Okay.
Good evening. My concern, and I'd like to address this to Cordell. My concern that I see in Bermuda presently is that black people are not having as many children as white people. My concern that is in 2 decades from now, our population is dwindling. We're spending an arm and a leg educating our children. They're coming back, can't find jobs. So what do we do? I mean, I'm addressing that to Cordell. I'm asking if you have statistics to prove what I'm saying, of what I'm visually seeing in the community. I'm seeing young white people having 2 and 3 children, where the young blacks might have 1 or 2. My second question will go to the gentleman next to the minister. I can't pronounce his name. Kowalski? Okay. I have a suggestion for you that you could take back to the Chamber of Commerce. Bermuda, our education system needs help, okay? I look at the IB companies, and if you guys would look at adopting a school, there's enough of you that you can either collectively or individually adopt a school. Your responsibility for that school is everything, for the budget, for the teachers, and that would alleviate the government somewhat. Plus, you would be able to mold some of those students into the type of businesses that you are doing. If it's fintechs, if it's international business, whatever you're doing. But adopt the schools. And it's similar to when you're driving in the United States and you see a clean highway and you see that it's sponsored and cleaned by the corporate citizens in that community. So that's my suggestion, to take back to the chamber and suggest that you guys adopt a school. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I noticed I'm like one of the youngest persons in the meeting, and it really concerns my age group. And I noticed, because I was born in this expensive Bermuda, and I never experienced where it was much cheaper and stuff. But I noticed like it's more about application, because a lot of us in my age group, they don't put in the work to receive a good income or live a good life. We do bare minimum, and then you're trying to make us a way for bare minimum to live good, and it's not going to work. Like some of the people sitting up there, they work for the jobs. That's why they have houses, and they could do good. But you can't have people that do nothing, just get drunk all the time and smoke, and then you expect them to own a house one day. Like, it's not going to happen. Because I see, like, people, my dad's age group, they're still doing the same thing they was doing when they was 18. And what you expect? You can't get better. They just do enough to get across. But I feel like one thing the government can do is, well, for me, I have like 4 jobs now. I'm going to pack up the speakers after this. But my point was, like, I think the government can make eating and like food, I think we have enough land to like at least like farm or something to make eating more possible for every citizen. Like, because that's what you need every day is food. You can't take the prices of jobs down and stuff like that, because this is a business. They have to do what they have to do. But like making food and living more easier, like, because if you can't eat, you can't live, and that's the only thing you have to spend money on every day is food, because everyone here is not homeless. It's homeless people, but they're doing less than bare minimum, because they didn't even do anything. They just wanted to do what they wanted to do. Yeah.
I'm going to be brief because the hour is late. Address the young man who spoke just a moment ago. I think in every society you're going to find persons who are not participating as they should in the labor force. But if you look at the statistics in terms of what we call the labor force participation rate, Bermuda has one of the highest labor force participation rates in the world. That means most people who are able to work are in fact working, primarily because we have to. With regard to the birth rate, I think the statistics will show that the birth rate for whites is in fact lower than the birth rate for blacks. Historically has been. Now, recently, I can't remember what the 2016 census said, but I don't think there would have been any major shift there. Most countries, in European countries, it's at 0 or less. And that's why they're having the challenges they've had their challenges longer than we are. We're now getting into this aging population where I think in 2017, the elderly population overtook our youth population. So we're going to go through what they're going through, and that's why they bring in more people. In the United States, the fastest growing group is the millennials, and that's because the immigrants are having children, not those who are born in the States. So I don't think that is correct, but I haven't looked at the data.
Before there's a comment, I just want to say that Mr. Kowalski has to go because he has, yes, it is his birthday, and yes. Yes, he's not just getting up to leave, because there are people waiting for him to show up.
So I think we're going to, thank you, Minister. I think we're going to have some final, very brief comments by the panelists.
Just to, and this is to follow up what Mr. Riley was just saying, this is the 2016 census book. And it's interesting because what you see in 2010 compared to 2016, and these are the age groups between 16 and 24, which should affect this young man, is telling you that their wages actually went down by 6% in that 6-year period. Females went down by 3%, and the males went down by 10%. Those are the numbers, and it's real.
Yeah, but I think the young man was saying that the people who experienced that they were undeserving. They weren't deserving of that. Is what you were saying? They weren't working hard enough. Right. So would you be in favor of a minimum wage or living wage for Bermudians, as they have in many other countries? Okay, thank you. We're winding up now. I'm going to take some final comments from the panelists. We'll start with Mr. Parent Chief to my right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Basically, I'm just going to wrap up by saying that I hope this conversation begins to spread and pick up and what have you, because I have learned a lot sitting here in the last 2 hours or so. But I want to say something very quickly about the challenges facing Bermuda at the moment in terms of the EU challenges that the international companies in this country can no longer just have shell companies. They have to now have a real presence, have employees here, and get away from zero taxation. So I think it might be prudent that a conversation begins around how much these international business ought to be taxed in order to stay out of the radar of the EU, and coming this June 2019, the OECD, the Organization of Economic Development, are now doing pretty much what the EU is doing. I say that this is a great time for Bermuda because we can train Bermudians to fill those positions, we can get more and higher wages, and Bermudians can live a better life. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All I would say is that this is new territory that Bermuda is going through, but we have many examples of other countries that have gone through this and gone through it quite successfully. So we have to devise a model that is one that works for Bermuda.
Mr. Ferber?
Certainly, in closing, these are very challenging times, and understand that when we look to make change, the people that don't want to see the change, particularly, are going to be respectfully very nasty. My understanding is that on the blogs a couple of days ago, the people were very nasty about the town hall meeting that was coming up for tonight, and the one's going to come up that's going to happen next week Thursday and the following Thursday. We're going to be able to have a sensible conversation. And certainly, people don't want to see the wealth shift. But certainly, this country, if it is still the 5th richest country per capita, then I think the citizens of this country need to deserve that kind of pay to make sure that they can have a reasonable quality of life. Reasonable quality, as I think it was said a moment ago. It's not like we want to be drinking Dom Perignon every night. I think all we want is to have a reasonable standard of living to make sure that we can take care of our families. That's all we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferber. I just want to say that I think it's incumbent upon me, as I wrap up, to say that let's not allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. Like I said, the most vulnerable amongst us are non-college educated, non-unionized, primarily black Bermudians in this labor market. And if we don't intervene now, that same restaurateur, who most of you know here, who's trying $9 an hour for a dishwasher and not putting him in the gratuities pool, will be paying $7 in 18 months an hour. And you know why he's doing so? Because he knows he can go and access Asian labor and bring it in here, which he's done. At least a third of the workforce is comprised of Asians. So I understand, I hear all the cries here, even amongst the panel here, for us to tackle all these other substantial issues, and they need to be tackled. But right now, on this issue, we're talking about implementing statutory wages, a minimum and a living wage. That's not to say that these other issues aren't important, but then we need to create other platforms to address those issues, and they are critical. Bringing down the cost of living, the cost of health care, the cost of food. These things are entrained by our government. Didn't you vote for those things? But you also voted for this. So let's do it, and let's make sure that we're not going to allow those who want to maintain the current status quo because it serves them. Let me tell you very quickly, and that's my final comment, this is what happens in societies with high levels of income inequality. And you tell me if this is not what you are experiencing in your own neighborhoods. In societies with high levels of income inequality, you get gang formation, gang violence, rise in capital crimes, particularly murder, poor educational outcomes, exacerbation of poverty, real and relative. I can go on and on. Tell me it's not what you're seeing in your, particularly your low-income households in every black community up and down here. Why do I say black? Because our white community, which comprises about 40% of your population, are insulated from the worst impacts of income inequality. Why? Because they have higher levels of income. You just heard the statistics from Mr. Ferber. And they have, in most cases, multi-generational wealth to insulate them from its worst impacts. That's why these impacts are all around your community. This is just one small initiative to try to address it. But these other things need to be addressed too. So we need to take this case to our government to ensure that they do. But this is just as critical. And I want to thank the minister for making this available. We had a good first session, and hopefully next Thursday when we hit the big city of Hamilton, we can continue the dialogue. And I'll let the minister have the final comments, and thank you so much.
Thank you. And I do want to thank our panelists, and we strive to ensure that we got people to speak here this evening from on every angle, and I think we achieved that, and I think the response from you, the audience, has been great. I was afraid that people would be afraid to get up and speak because perhaps they didn't appreciate in totality the discussion, but I think the discussion did what it was supposed to do, to create further awareness in you and to let you know why it is important as a country that we have this conversation. Because as a government, we do operate under the premise that we are our brother's keepers, and if there is an issue, and it particularly are issues at the lower rungs of the economic ladder, and this government knows that it is an issue that must be addressed if we are going to at least help our people to recognize a better living situation. And so I thank you for coming out, and this conversation will continue next week, and I hope you and you tell 50 other people to come out, because it is important, because it is affecting you, it will affect your children, and we need to have this conversation, and we need to have as many people as possible participate. It will be, thank you, it will be at Centennial Hall, St. Paul's Church Centennial Hall, and the week after that, it will be in Somerset at Somerset Cricket Club. And the panelists will be with us. Thank you.